My name is Isla Cameron. I am 28 years old, and for the past 2 years, I have worked at Fort Whitley Shooting Range, replacing targets for soldiers and special operators. It is not glamorous work. It is the kind of job where people barely register you exist. You show up early, haul paper targets and plywood frames, and disappear into the background. But that morning, something happened that would burn itself into the memory of everyone present. I was lying prone behind a Barrett 50 caliber sniper rifle, the world shrinking into a narrow tunnel through the scope. The entire range was silent, as if even the wind had paused to watch. Somewhere behind me, I heard my father's voice, sharp and dismissive. "She's just replacing targets," he scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do not waste your time." My jaw tightened. He had said things like that my entire life, and somehow it still cut deep. A high-ranking general stood just a few feet away, his hands clasped behind his back. He looked at me with a skeptical frown and said, "Only legends can make that shot." His words hung in the cold morning air, and I felt the weight of them settle on my shoulders. 3,600 meters. That was the distance. No one had hit a target at that range in over a decade. Then Captain Mason Grant of the Navy SEALs stepped forward. He held the massive Barrett rifle in both hands, the steel glinting faintly in the pale light. He set it down gently in front of me, met my eyes, and said in a steady voice, "Show us." He stepped back, his expression unreadable. In that moment, I could feel dozens of eyes on me, including my father's. My palms were damp against the cold metal of the rifle. My breathing slowed to a deliberate rhythm. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. The world narrowed further. I lined up the crosshairs, feeling every muscle in my body go still. My hands trembled slightly, but I forced myself to stay calm. This was the kind of shot that could make or break reputations. I heard the wind flag snap faintly in the distance and adjusted for the breeze. Micro-corrections only my father had ever taught me to calculate. I knew he was watching, arms crossed, waiting for me to fail. My finger pressed gently against the trigger. There was a sharp crack as the rifle recoiled hard into my shoulder. The round left the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second, slicing through the air, a streak of lead racing across the field and beyond. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. My heart hammered so loudly it drowned out everything else. Through the scope, I saw the impossible. The bullet punched directly through the center of the target 3,600 meters away. Dead center. I blinked, hardly believing it. Around me, there was no cheer, no applause. Only silence. Absolute silence. I pushed myself up slowly, the Barrett heavy in my hands. The general approached, his eyes wide, his face pale. He stopped just a step away from me, studying me as if I were something alien. Then, in a low, almost reverent voice, he whispered one word, "Valkyrie." I felt the eyes of everyone on that range bore into me. My father's gaze, cold and unreadable, shifted away the moment I looked at him. His jaw was tight, his face carved from stone. My hands were still trembling slightly as I set the rifle down. That was the moment everything changed. The record had been shattered. My father's arrogance, the one constant I had lived under my entire life, cracked in front of me. But I also knew deep down that this was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. I stood up, brushing the dust from my uniform pants, trying to steady my breathing. My first instinct was to leave, to slip away quietly and avoid the weight of so many eyes. I reached for the rifle to hand it back, but before I could move, the murmurs began. "That's not possible," one voice muttered behind me. "She must have cheated," another said louder this time. "No way she hit that clean." I froze, feeling the sting of their words. Even now, after what they had all witnessed, they could not believe it. I turned slightly, scanning the faces gathered behind the firing line. Some stared at me in awe, others with suspicion. My father was one of the latter. He stepped closer, shaking his head slowly, lips curling into the faintest smirk. "You're just replacing targets, Isla," he said coldly, repeating the same words he had used before the shot. "Don't let this fill your head. You are not special." The words landed harder than any recoil ever could. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my face neutral, but something inside me twisted. It was not just the insult, it was the years of dismissal behind it. Every moment he had treated me like I was lesser. Every time he told me I did not belong on the firing line. I turned back toward the field, the target still fluttering with a perfect hole through its center. It should have felt like vindication, but instead, it felt like a challenge. I remembered every long day at the range, my father standing behind me as I worked, telling me to stay in my lane. He had pushed me into the background of this world, and now he was trying to push me there again. As I moved to leave, someone called my name. I turned to see Captain Mason Grant approaching. He carried the Barrett in one hand and wore an expression that was both impressed and cautious. "That shot," he said quietly, glancing toward the distant target. "It needs to be documented. It will not go unnoticed." I frowned, unsure what he meant. "Why do I feel like you are warning me, Captain?" He paused, his gaze steady. "Because a shot like that threatens people. Records are not just numbers. They are legacies, reputations, and careers. Breaking one can bring a storm you are not prepared for." I felt the weight of his words settle on me. My instinct was to argue, to say the truth should be enough. But I looked at my father standing off to the side, arms crossed, eyes hard. He had not congratulated me. He had not even acknowledged what I had accomplished. Instead, he wore the expression of a man embarrassed, as though my success had exposed something he wanted to hide. Captain Grant leaned in slightly. "Isla, listen to me. That shot was extraordinary, but you need to be careful. This will cause waves, big ones." I nodded slowly, though I was not sure I fully understood. "Waves," I repeated under my breath. The idea seemed strange. I had hit a target, that was all. But as I stepped away from the firing line, the voices behind me still buzzing with disbelief, I felt something shift inside me. I was no longer invisible, and I had the uneasy sense that the storm Mason Grant warned me about was already gathering on the horizon. I was 18 when I first put on a uniform. The Army had always been a distant shadow in my life because of my father's service. But the day I swore in, I felt like I had stepped into my own story. I was young, ambitious, and eager to prove myself. Basic training was hard, but I thrived under pressure. My scores on the rifle range quickly caught everyone's attention. I could hit targets most recruits barely saw, and I did it with a calm, steady rhythm that made instructors pause. But my father never let me celebrate. He would call late at night, his voice clipped and cold. "You're good because you're lucky, Isla," he said once after I called to tell him I'd earned top marks in marksmanship. "Don't confuse luck with skill. Luck runs out." It was always like that. Every accomplishment I earned, every ribbon I pinned to my uniform, he dismissed as coincidence. At first I tried harder, hoping he might soften. He never did. By my third year, I had worked my way into a sniper team attached to a special operations unit. We trained endlessly, pushing ourselves beyond exhaustion. My spotter and I had developed a bond built on trust. We moved as one, each understanding the other's breathing, the cadence of our steps. But that bond didn't save me when everything fell apart. It happened on a mission I still dream about. We were deployed overseas, tasked with providing overwatch for a raid on a compound suspected of housing enemy leaders. The environment was hostile, unpredictable, and the orders came down fast. We were positioned on a ridgeline, wind ripping at our hides, when the call came in. engage the targets. I lined up my shot, calculated windage and distance, and fired. My first round landed exactly where it was supposed to. But seconds later, chaos erupted over the radio. A friendly element had been moving into the same sector we were told to clear. The entire mission collapsed into confusion. When the smoke cleared, we learned that a civilian had been caught in the crossfire. One life lost, a failure the higher-ups needed someone to answer for. And they chose me. The officer in charge of our team, a man I had trusted, stood in the debriefing room and said I had fired recklessly. He claimed I ignored protocol, that my judgment had been compromised. My spotter stayed silent, avoiding my eyes as the accusations piled on. I remember staring at the table, my hands balled into fists, hearing words like court-martial whispered just loud enough for me to catch. I tried to explain that I had fired under direct orders, that the coordinates we were given had been wrong, but no one cared. They needed someone to blame, and I was the easiest target. For weeks, I lived under the threat of trial, wondering if my career and my freedom were about to end. In the end, they dropped the charges, but not because they believed me. They wanted the scandal buried, so they pushed me out quietly. One day, I was a sniper with a future. The next, I was packing my gear and signing discharge papers. When I came home, I hoped my father might at least stand by me. Instead, he met me at the door with a look of disappointment that felt sharper than any knife. "You made a mess, Isla," he said, his voice flat. "You embarrassed yourself. Worse, you embarrassed this family." I wanted to scream, to tell him I had been betrayed by the very people I trusted with my life. But I didn't. I just stood there, my duffel bag heavy on my shoulder, listening as he laid the blame squarely at my feet. That night, I unpacked in the small bedroom I'd grown up in, staring at the walls that hadn't changed since high school. I felt hollow, as if all the air had been drained from my lungs. The army had been my purpose, my place in the world. Without it, I was adrift. My father offered no comfort, no advice. He only reminded me over and over that I had failed. Eventually, I found work at the range, a quiet place where no one asked questions. I replaced targets, swept the floors, and tried not to think about the soldier I used to be. My father still came by occasionally, but his visits were only to remind me that in his eyes, I had squandered my potential. Every time he looked at me, I felt that old shame rise up again. And every time, I buried it deeper, telling myself I would never again give anyone the chance to destroy me like that. But as I stood on the firing line that morning, the Barrett 50 in my hands, I knew those wounds had never fully healed. They were still there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to be torn open again. I took the job at Fort Whitley because anonymity was easier than explaining why I no longer wore a unit patch. The range opened before dawn. Solvent and wet cardboard scented the air. Gravel crunched under boots that did not belong to me anymore. I stacked targets, checked staple guns, and kept my head down when familiar silhouettes crossed the parking lot. Some of the shooters had shared chow lines and blackout nights with me. They recognized my gait before my face. I turned away before memory could finish the math. Silence was my camouflage. Routine was my shelter. Replacing targets is a rhythm you feel in your shins. Jog the lane with pastors and a stapler. Pull the shredded sheet, square a fresh bull. Too high, too low. One through the heart to keep it from yawing. The wind speaks in small ways. It nicks plywood. It lifts a corner when you are careless. It hums when gusts push the frames. I watched flags but trusted the ground more. The shimmering mirage. The angle of drifting dust, the way a spent casing falls short when a breeze steals its arc. Old habits refused to die. My eyes calculated while my mouth stayed quiet. The pocket watch lived in my right cargo pocket, a small weight that tapped my thigh when I ran. My father's watch, brass scuffed by years, a compass rose on the lid, the hinge a little loose. He pressed it into my palm the day I shipped out and said it would keep me on time. What it kept me on was a leash. I told myself to leave it on the dresser. Every morning my hand found it again. I hated that watch, yet I carried it like contraband memory. Limits. That was what it meant. Time limits. Range limits. A voice that divided the world into lanes and told me to stay in mine. When the lid snapped shut, it sounded like a verdict. The morning I first spoke with Captain Mason Grant began with a low marine layer and a left-to-right breeze teasing the flags at 200 and 500. A Navy team rolled in with hard cases and quiet mouths. I logged their lanes and ran downrange to tape the frames. At the 500, the gusts tasted like salt. I bent staples into the wood with my thumb so they would not walk out, a trick learned after losing a full rack to a mischievous wind. When I jogged back, a man at the line studied the mirage like it was a language he respected. He was not posturing. He looked like someone listening. He caught my eye, not with reverence, but with the steady look of a craftsman noticing another. "Left to right, 5 to 7, he said. "Feels switchy at mid-range." I kept my answer neutral. "Stronger past the tree break. The flags lie for the first 100. He tilted his head. A thin smile touched one corner. "You shoot?" he asked. I shook my head. I replaced targets. He let it rest. Rodriguez was struggling. Through the spotting scope, you could see a ragged string of holes walking left like footprints in wet sand. He reset. Shoulders tight. Trigger slap. Another miss. I paced the line, not to interfere, just to keep lanes clear. Grant called the range cold for housekeeping and drifted closer while bolts stayed open. "You called the tree break without looking," he said. "How did you know?" I nodded toward the berm. "Listen to the plywood. It hums different when gusts funnel through the gap. The staples on lane 4 are starting to creep." He glanced down range and gave a small nod. I avoided old teammates by habit. If someone said my name, I pretended not to hear. I timed my runs while their faces were buried in scopes. I had convinced myself that silence was safety. As long as I swept brass and stapled paper, nobody would ask where I had been when a mission went wrong. Grant possessed the unnerving talent of noticing what others missed. He began checking his dope with quiet questions tossed my way, not testing me, sounding the edges. "Mirage looks slow at 800, he said. "Hold or dial. Dial .2. Hold half a body for the switch at mid," I answered before I could stop myself. He did not look up. "You sure you do not shoot?" I gave a non-committal sound and walked on. He saw the watch drop one afternoon and thump the concrete. We crouched together while I brushed grit from the glass. "Old," he said. "A gift," I answered, "from my father." He studied the compass rose, then my face, then the wind. By week's end, he stopped asking whether I shot and started framing it in the past tense. "When you were on a gun," he said softly, "did you favor dialing or holding? Did you carry data on a card or in your head?" The questions landed with surgical precision. I kept my voice flat. I replace targets. I keep time. I make sure nobody staples a hand to a frame. He let the deflection pass, but I felt pressure building like a low front pushing in from offshore. The watch tapped my leg, tick, tick, tick. On Saturday, after the last string, the wind finally eased. Flags hung like tired arms. Grant pointed toward the far berm. "You called the gusts all day," he said. "You were right every time." He looked at me as if unfolding a map that had been creased too long. "I think your past is not the one you carry in your mouth." I felt the watch go cold against my thigh, the metal heavy as a secret. "My past belongs where it can do no more harm," I said. He held my gaze for a long second and gave a small nod that felt like the beginning of something I could not yet name. The shot traveled faster than the bullet itself. Word spread through Fort Whitley like wildfire. By the next morning, My name was in whispered conversations at the chow hall and scribbled in chalk on the boards outside the ready rooms. 3,600 meters, center mass. It was the kind of shot that turned shooters into legends. But I was no legend. I was a former soldier working a civilian job stapling paper. That fact alone made people restless, and it did not take long for the official questions to begin. I was stacking cardboard backers behind the range office when I heard my name barked sharply. "Cameron, inside, now." Major Reeves stood in the doorway, arms folded across his chest, jaw locked in the same way it always was when he was preparing to peel someone apart. Reeves was head of the security office, a man with a reputation for never giving anyone the benefit of the doubt. The small conference room smelled of burnt coffee and paper dust. Reeves dropped a file onto the table with a heavy thud. "Do you know why you're here?" I stayed standing. "Because I made a shot that people don't want to believe happened." Reeves's lip twitched. "Because you made a shot with military-issued equipment you had no clearance to touch. You are not in the Army anymore, Cameron. You work here as a civilian range attendant. Who authorized you to lay hands on that Barrett?" I could feel the weight of the question pressing down. "Captain Grant handed me the rifle," I said evenly. "He asked me to make the shot. It was his lane, his weapon." Reeves' eyes narrowed. "Convenient. And how does a former soldier turned target stapler put a round through the center of a steel plate at 3,600 meters on her first attempt? That shot is beyond our best shooters, Cameron. It was beyond the man whose record you just broke." I opened my mouth to answer, but Reeves cut me off with a sharp gesture. "You have no unit patch, no recent qualification, and no reason to even be near a live firing line. Unless, of course, you were trying to make a name for yourself. People have rigged targets before, you know. Triggered them with explosives. Called for spotters to signal hits. Do you understand the seriousness of this?" The walls seemed to close in. My hands clenched at my sides, but I kept my voice steady. "There was no rigging. There were dozens of witnesses. You saw the target yourself." Reeves leaned forward, palms flat on the table. "What I saw was a civilian with a history of disciplinary issues, being given access to restricted equipment. That doesn't look good, and you're going to answer for it." When I left the office, the hallway felt colder than before. People glanced up from their desks and quickly looked away when my eyes met theirs. I could feel the story growing larger than the truth. Later that day, I saw my father standing near the bleachers outside the range. He had probably already heard about the investigation. News traveled fastest through the people who enjoyed watching me fail. I approached cautiously, hoping maybe he would at least listen. "They're saying I cheated," I told him quietly. He did not even look at me at first, just stared out at the lanes. Finally, he exhaled through his nose and said, "I can't blame them. That shot was impossible. I also think it was luck." I froze. "You don't believe me either?" He turned then, his expression unreadable. "I believe you hit the target, but I think you have confused one extraordinary moment with proof that you belong back on the firing line. Do not build your life on chance, Isla. You will be disappointed again." His words left a hollow ache in my chest. He was not going to stand up for me. He never had. When I walked away from him, Mason Grant intercepted me near the ammo lockers. He had that same quiet look in his eyes, a mix of concern and calculation. Reeves called me into his office. He said, "He's making this sound bigger than it is. You need to understand something. The record you broke? It belonged to men who still wear stars on their collars. They built careers on it. That shot of yours threatens all of that." I nodded slowly, remembering his warning after the shot. Waves. This was the storm. "So they're going to make sure no one believes it," I said. Mason's jaw tightened. "Exactly. And they're not above using people like Reeves to bury the truth. You need to be careful. You're on your own out here now." The realization settled in like lead in my stomach. My father had dismissed me. My reputation was being dismantled piece by piece, and I was starting to see that the bullet had not just punched through a target. It had pierced something much larger, something I did not yet fully understand. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the pocket watch cold in my hand. It ticked softly, indifferent to my fear. For the first time, I wondered if carrying it was not a reminder of limits, but a warning that I was about to be pushed beyond mine. Mason found me after the range had emptied for the day. I was in the maintenance shed, sweeping brass from the concrete floor into a dented metal bucket. The sound of the broom against the ground was rhythmic, almost soothing, until I noticed him standing in the doorway, hands tucked in his pockets, eyes darting to make sure no one else was around. "Cameron," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I leaned on the broom handle. If this is about Reeves, I already know. He wants me gone. "It's bigger than Reeves," Mason said, stepping inside and closing the door softly behind him. "There's a group of people, call them what you want, a committee, a network, who have a lot invested in that record you broke. They're not happy about you being the one to replace it. They're already pulling strings to erase what you did." I felt a cold knot twist in my stomach. Erase it? There were witnesses, Mason. Dozens of them. He shook his head. Witnesses forget. Records can be altered. All it takes is one official statement saying the shot was never verified, and the story becomes whatever they want it to be. They'll bury you, Isla. Quietly, but completely. I set the broom aside, the words settling over me like a lead blanket. So that's it? I just let them destroy me because they're powerful? Mason's expression hardened. "No, you fight back, but you have to be smart about it. I'm inviting you to something tomorrow morning, a long-range training event with my SEAL team. There will be senior instructors, observers, and enough eyes on the line that they won't be able to twist what they see. You'll demonstrate what you're capable of, on record, in front of people who will vouch for it." I stared at him, unsure. "You want me to perform like some circus act for your team?" "This isn't about proving anything to me," he said, his voice steady. "It's about protecting yourself. You can't let their version of events become the only version. If they manage to discredit you now, you'll never get the chance to clear your name again." I crossed my arms, thinking of Reeves's narrowed eyes, my father's dismissive words echoing in my ears. "And you really think one demonstration will stop them?" "It won't stop them," Mason admitted, "but it'll make it harder for them to write you off. You'll have witnesses, documentation. You'll force people to question the narrative Reeves and his friends are trying to build." My first instinct was to refuse. I hated the idea of stepping back into the spotlight, hated the thought of giving these men another opportunity to tear me apart if I failed. But then I remembered the way Reeves had looked at me in that office, like I was already guilty of something I hadn't done. I remembered my father shaking his head, saying the word luck like it was a curse. I straightened my shoulders. "I'm not going to let them bend the truth again," I said. Mason nodded, almost as if he had expected the answer all along. "Good. Be at the East Gate at 0500. Bring nothing but yourself and the clothes on your back. My team will handle the rest." He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. "One more thing," he added. "If you're going to do this, you need to understand what's at stake. The people we're up against, they don't like losing control. They're not going to stop after this. You'll be making enemies, Hila. Powerful ones." I met his gaze. "I already have." Mason gave me a small nod of respect before disappearing into the fading light. I was left alone with the broom and the hum of the fluorescent lights above my head. For a long time I stood there, feeling the weight of the choice I had just made. When I finally closed up the shed and walked back toward my small apartment on base, I reached into my pocket and felt the familiar shape of the old pocket watch. I held it in my palm for a moment, staring at the tarnished brass and the faintly scratched compass rose on the lid. My father's voice echoed in my memory. "That watch will keep you on time. Stay in your lane, Isla." I slipped it back into my pocket and whispered, "Not this time." The next morning, I would walk into a firing line surrounded by men who had built their lives on never missing, and I would show them, every single one of them, that I belonged there. The next morning, the air was sharp with cold when I arrived at the east gate as Mason instructed. The sun had not yet breached the horizon, and the world was painted in muted shades of gray. Mason was already there, leaning casually against a Humvee, clipboard in hand. He nodded at me with that same calm, calculating look. "Right on time," he said. "Get in. We've got a long day ahead." We drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, the gravel road leading deeper into a part of Fort Whitley I had never seen. The range we eventually reached was massive, larger and more remote than the one where I worked. Firing lanes stretched across rolling hills, steel targets set at distances that seemed almost impossible. The SEAL team was already there, setting up rifles and adjusting optics. I slipped out of the Humvee, hyper-aware of the curious glances in my direction. Some men nodded politely. Others simply stared, expressionless, as though trying to decide if I was an asset or a liability. I kept my head down and busied myself checking wind flags. Mason clapped his hands together and addressed the group. "We're running advanced distance drills today. You all know why she's here," he said, tilting his head toward me. "Eyes open. Learn something." We paired off into shooter-spotter teams. That was when I noticed Rodriguez struggling at the far lane. He was missing consistently, his rounds walking left, scattering erratically across the dirt berm. His frustration was obvious. He yanked his bolt harder each time, cursed under his breath, then slammed the next round into the chamber with too much force. "Range cold," Mason called after a while. Everyone stepped back and cleared their rifles. I walked toward Rodriguez's lane, drawn by the unmistakable tension in his body. He noticed me approaching and bristled immediately. "I'm fine," he muttered, setting the rifle down on its bipod. "You're not fine," I said quietly. "You're muscling the gun. Your trigger pull is jerky and your body's canted too far forward. You're fighting it instead of letting it work for you." He glared at me, then sighed and looked downrange. "I've tried adjusting. It's not working." I crouched beside him, deliberately calm. "Let me see you get behind the rifle." He hesitated but finally complied, dropping prone again. I nudged his left elbow out an inch. "Your support arm is too far under. Give the rifle a stable platform." Then I adjusted his grip, loosening the tension in his shoulders. "Relax here. Grip it like you're holding something fragile. Too much pressure and you'll torque the shot off target." He followed my instructions, but I could feel his skepticism. I knelt next to him as he settled into the new position. "Trigger press straight back. Don't anticipate the recoil. Just focus on the crosshairs breaking clean." He fired, and the steel rang faintly in the distance. His eyes widened. "I hit it," he whispered. "Again," I said. He cycled the bolt, took his time, and squeezed. Another hit. "See?" I murmured. "You weren't missing because you can't shoot. You were missing because you weren't stable." Rodriguez looked at me for the first time, and I froze when I saw recognition flicker in his eyes. It was subtle, but unmistakable. "Cameron," he said slowly as if tasting the name. "I know you. We served together." My stomach dropped. "It was Afghanistan," he continued, his voice low. "That mission, the one they said you botched. I was there, Isla. I saw what happened." I forced my face into neutrality, even as my chest tightened. "You're mistaken," I said, my voice steady. But he shook his head, still watching me with that dawning awareness. "No, I remember. They blamed you, but it wasn't your fault. Orders were screwed from the top down, and they needed a scapegoat." I should have said something then. "Rodriguez," I interrupted sharply, keeping my tone controlled. "This isn't the time or place. Focus on the training." He hesitated, then gave a small nod. Yeah, sure. I stood and stepped back, my heart pounding. The smell of gun oil and dust clung to the air, but all I could feel was the weight of the past pressing in. Rodriguez's words had stirred something I had buried deep. He had been there. He had seen it. Mason called the range hot again, and rifles barked in unison. I kept my hands busy, adjusting spotting scopes and checking data, but my mind was spinning. I wanted to ask Rodriguez what he remembered, what he knew, but I couldn't risk drawing attention. When the drill ended, Mason approached me quietly. "Good work with Rodriguez," he said. "You calmed him down. He's a better shooter when he listens." I nodded, masking the turmoil under a blank expression. "Thanks." But inside, I was anything but calm. The revelation that Rodriguez had witnessed the mission where I was betrayed could change everything. Still, I swallowed the impulse to dig deeper. Not now. Not here. I slipped my hand into my pocket and felt the cold weight of the watch against my palm. Its ticking was steady, indifferent. I closed my fingers around it and reminded myself to keep my composure. If Rodriguez knew the truth, I would find a way to hear it later. For now, I had to keep my past locked down tight. The people I was up against could not suspect I still had pieces of the puzzle left to uncover. After the training ended, the team packed up rifles and brass, while Mason dismissed the men with a few sharp instructions. The sky was deepening into a dusky orange as I carried my gear toward the admin office to check something that had been nagging at me all day. Fort Whitley kept a meticulous record of range activities, especially for live-fire events. Every shot was logged by digital sensors tied to the target system. My record-breaking shot should have been preserved in black and white. With dozens of witnesses and a full digital log, I had assumed I would be untouchable. But Mason's warning about people twisting the narrative gnawed at me. I needed to see the record with my own eyes. Inside the office, the fluorescent lights flickered faintly as I logged into the system. The interface was familiar. Rows of date stamps, shooter names, and ballistic data. I scrolled to the day of the record shot, my heart pounding in my chest. The entry should have been there. It wasn't. I double-checked the date. Nothing. I searched my name. No results. It was gone. I sat back slowly, my hands curling into fists against the edge of the desk. They hadn't just questioned my credibility. They had erased the very proof of what I had done. My chest felt tight as the realization settled like ice. I felt Mason's presence before I heard him. He stood in the doorway, his expression grave as he glanced at the blank screen in front of me. "You're looking for it, aren't you?" "They deleted it," I said flatly, the words scraping out of my throat. He stepped into the office, lowering his voice. "I told you they would. The record you broke didn't belong to just anyone. It was held by a group of officers, men who now sit in high positions, some with stars on their collars. That shot was part of their legacy. And legacies are valuable currency in this world." I turned to face him, anger flickering under my ribs. "So they just erase me? Pretend it never happened?" Mason leaned against the desk, arms folded. "That's exactly what they're doing. They don't care about fairness or facts. They care about preserving their own reputations. To them, you're a threat. Erasing the data, planting doubt. That's how they neutralize threats." My father's voice from the other day rang in my ears. "You're lucky, Ayla. Don't confuse luck with skill." He had dismissed me too, and now the entire system was following his example. "I'm not going to let them get away with this," I said, my voice low and steady. Mason studied me carefully. "Then you need to be smarter than them. You can't just complain to Reeves or anyone in his orbit. They'll spin it as paranoia. You need something they can't erase or deny." I nodded, my jaw set. New evidence, something indisputable. "Exactly," he said. "But if you're going to do that, you can't miss. You only get one shot." The word miss struck me harder than it should have. Missing was not an option, not in marksmanship, and not in this fight. I clenched my fists. Then I won't miss. Not this time. Mason tilted his head, a flicker of approval crossing his face. You're going to need witnesses, and not just the kind who can be pressured into silence. The right people in the right place. I looked back at the empty screen, my reflection ghosting in the monitor. I thought of how easily they had stripped away the only proof of the most significant shot of my life. They think I'm invisible, I said quietly. That makes them careless. I'll use that. Mason gave me a small nod. I'll help you, but you have to understand, they won't stop if you succeed. This will escalate. Let it, I said, standing. If I'm going to be hunted either way, I might as well give them a reason to be afraid. I slipped the pocket watch out of my cargo pocket, rolling its weight in my palm. My father had given it to me as a symbol of staying in my lane, of obeying limits. But now it was something else, a reminder that time was running out for me to reclaim my name. I closed the lid with a sharp snap and met Mason's gaze. If I'm going to do this, I said, I can't afford a single mistake. I'll take the shot, and this time they'll have nowhere to hide. Mason's expression was unreadable as he straightened. Then we start planning now. They've erased one record. We'll make sure the next one is too big for them to bury. As we left the office, I could feel the fear simmering in my chest. But beneath it, something harder was forming. Resolve. They had erased me once. It would not happen again. The summons came before sunrise, a curt message from Major Reeves ordering me to report to his office immediately. My gut twisted as soon as I saw it. There was no reason for him to call me in at that hour unless something was badly wrong. When I walked into the security building, the air was thick with tension. Reeves was behind his desk, leaning forward, hands clasped together like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. 2 armed MPs stood silently by the door, their expressions cold and unreadable. Cameron, Reeves said, his voice clipped. Do you know why you're here? I forced myself to meet his eyes. No, sir, but I'm guessing you're about to tell me. He slid a file across the desk. Last night, the Armory's security alarm was triggered. Upon review, we discovered that several weapons were accessed without proper authorization. You were recorded entering the building after hours. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. That's impossible. I wasn't anywhere near the Armory. Reeves raised an eyebrow, clearly savoring the moment. So you're saying the security footage is lying? I clenched my fists at my sides. I'm saying I was in my apartment all night. Whatever you think you saw, it wasn't me. He leaned back in his chair, the faintest smirk tugging at his mouth. Interesting, because your record of insubordination and past disciplinary issues makes this look awfully familiar. It seems you have a pattern of behavior, Cameron. Unauthorized access, reckless decisions, refusal to take responsibility when caught. My chest tightened as his words dragged me back 5 years, to the mission where I'd been scapegoated and nearly court-martialed. This is a setup, I said, my voice hardening. You know it. Reeves's smirk deepened. What I know is that the evidence speaks for itself. Unless you can produce something compelling to prove your innocence, I'll have no choice but to recommend formal charges. And we both know how that ends for someone with your history. I felt the room closing in, the MPs shifting slightly as if ready to escort me out in cuffs. My father's voice echoed in my mind. You embarrassed this family. Reeves wanted me cornered, humiliated, erased just like before. But this time I wasn't alone. As I left the building, the cold morning air hit me like a slap. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how they had pulled this off. Mason was waiting near the parking lot, his jaw set when he saw my face. What happened? They're accusing me of breaking into the Armory, I said, my voice tight. Reeves claims there's footage of me inside last night. Mason's expression darkened. Footage that probably doesn't exist or has been doctored. I nodded. But if I can't prove it, I'm done. They'll push for a court-martial. just like last time. A voice behind us made me turn. There might be a way. Rodriguez stood there, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, glancing around nervously. I heard what they're saying about you, and I think I can help. I frowned. Why? Because I know what it feels like to be railroaded, he said quietly. And because I was there the last time they hung you out to dry. I stayed silent then, and I regret it. I'm not doing it again. Mason stepped closer. What do you have in mind? Rodriguez hesitated, then lowered his voice. The Armory has hidden cameras the MPs don't advertise, backup recordings that don't run through the same system Reeves controls. If we can get to those, we might be able to prove you weren't there. My heart jumped. Do you know where the feed is stored? Yeah, he said. I saw it once when I was pulling overnight duty. But we'll have to be careful. If Reeves realizes we're poking around, he'll bury whatever evidence exists before we can touch it. Mason looked at me, his jaw tight. It's risky, Isla. If they catch us, they'll say we're tampering with evidence. I exhaled slowly. We don't have a choice. If I can't clear my name, I'll be finished. And I am not going to let them destroy me again. Rodriguez gave a short nod. Then we go tonight. I'll show you where the backup system is, but we have to move fast. I felt the familiar weight of the pocket watch in my pocket, the metal pressing cold against my thigh. The ticking seemed louder than usual, a reminder that time was running out. I met Mason's eyes and said, I won't be framed again. Not this time. We find that footage or I'm done. He didn't argue. He just nodded once, sharp and certain. Then we make sure we get it. For the first time since Reeves had thrown his accusations at me, I felt something other than fear. I felt resolve. They had set the trap, but I was not going to be their scapegoat again. This time, I would fight back. That night, the base was quiet. Rodriguez led the way through a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the Armory, his flashlight beam flickering across pipes and concrete. My heart thudded in my chest with every step. We weren't supposed to be there, and if anyone caught us, Reeves would bury us for tampering with evidence. Rodriguez stopped at a locked steel door, glancing over his shoulder. This is it, he whispered. He pulled a small keycard from his pocket and swiped it. I never turned this in after my last rotation. The door clicked open, and we slipped inside a small security control room lined with servers and monitors. The hum of electronics filled the space. Rodriguez moved straight to a terminal in the corner, typing quickly as Mason kept watch near the door. I stood close enough to see the screen. Here, Rodriguez said finally, pulling up archived video feeds. He navigated to the night of the alleged Armory breach. My stomach tightened when I saw the familiar hallway appear on the monitor. We fast-forwarded through hours of empty corridors until a figure appeared at the Armory door. It wasn't me. It was Major Reeves. I watched in silence as he scanned into the Armory, deliberately disabling a sensor before entering. A few minutes later, another figure joined him, a man I hadn't seen in years, but whose face was burned into my memory. General Donovan, one of the senior officers who had overseen the mission that had ruined my career. Rodriguez swore under his breath. They set you up. I barely heard him. My focus was locked on the next moments captured on the feed. Reeves and Donovan spoke quietly, their voices inaudible, but their intent was clear as they planted evidence inside the Armory. My hands curled into fists at my sides. They had fabricated everything just like before. Then came the blow that knocked the air from my lungs. Another man entered the frame. My father. I staggered back a step, nearly colliding with the server rack. Pause it, I said, my voice raw. Rodriguez froze the frame. There was no mistaking him. My father standing shoulder to shoulder with the men who had destroyed me 5 years ago. He looked older, wearier than I remembered, but his posture was familiar, rigid, dutiful. The video resumed, and I watched as he signed a document Donovan handed him. a single line across the page, his name etched in black ink beneath the words, "Order to maintain silence." I couldn't breathe. "He knew," I whispered. "All this time. He knew what they did to me." Mason moved closer, his expression tense. "Isla!" But I couldn't stop staring at the screen. My father had chosen to protect the family's reputation rather than defend me. He had stood by while I was scapegoated, his signature sealing my fate. The pain was sharp, twisting deep in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I won't retaliate," I said finally, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "I'll make them admit what they've done, publicly. That's the only way this ends." Rodriguez looked at me uncertainly. "We can leak this footage. People would see everything." I shook my head. "Not yet. If we move too early, they'll claim it's doctored. They'll twist it, just like they always do. We need to set the stage, force them to confront the truth when they have no way out." Mason studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "She's right. We need to be strategic. If we're going to bring down Donovan and Reeves, we need undeniable proof and witnesses who can't be silenced." I wiped a tear from my cheek before it could fall. The betrayal burned, but I buried it deep, locking it behind a wall of resolve. My father's choices were his own. If I let that pain control me now, they would win again. "We use the training event," I said. "We make it impossible for them to deny my skill, and when the time is right, we drop the truth. They won't be able to erase me twice." Rodriguez nodded grimly, closing the terminal and copying the footage to a secure drive. "This isn't over, Isla. Not by a long shot." "No," I agreed quietly, clutching the drive in my hand like a lifeline. "But next time, it won't be me on trial. It'll be them." As we slipped back through the maintenance tunnel, the weight of the revelation pressed on me like a physical force. My father's signature replayed in my mind again and again, but I refused to break. I had survived their lies once. This time, I would make sure the truth destroyed them. The next morning, I woke before dawn with the taste of iron in my mouth. My stomach churned as I dressed in the same range gear I had worn countless times before, but this time it felt like armor. Mason drove me to the range in silence, the tension thick enough to choke on. When we arrived, the entire setup was different. Instead of the usual quiet discipline, there was a crowd. Dozens of soldiers, instructors, and officers lined the bleachers. The air buzzed with anticipation, the way it always did before someone was about to be judged. Reeves stood front and center, flanked by General Donovan. My father was beside them, arms crossed, his face carved from stone. I felt his eyes on me like a weight. If he hoped to intimidate me, he had chosen the wrong day. Reeves stepped forward, his voice booming. "Today, Cameron will have the opportunity to demonstrate whether her so-called record shot was legitimate or a fluke. She will engage 3 targets at extreme distance, under shifting wind conditions. Failure to meet the standard will result in her permanent disqualification from any future range duties, civilian or otherwise. In other words, succeed or disappear." I nodded once, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Mason led me to the firing line where a Barrett .50 caliber rifle rested on its bipod, gleaming in the morning light. The wind was already gusting, changing direction unpredictably as the sun crested the horizon. Someone had designed this to be impossible. Targets are set at 2,800, 3,200, and 3,600 meters, the range officer announced. All 3 must be hit center mass in sequence. No mulligans. I lay prone behind the rifle, the cold earth pressing into my ribs as I adjusted my body. My father stood just behind the bleachers, hands shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't nod or scowl. He just watched, unreadable. Mason crouched beside me and murmured, "You can do this. Just trust yourself." I glanced at him briefly, then settled into my scope. The first target shimmered in the heat mirage at 2,800 meters. The wind flag near the firing line flapped lazily left, but the distant flag twisted right. Switchy. I knew the type. Gusts that split the lane in half, changing direction between the shooter and the target. My hands moved automatically, adjusting for windage and elevation. Behind me, I could hear the crowd murmuring. Reeves's voice cut through the noise. "You may fire when ready, Cameron." I inhaled slowly, letting my lungs fill completely. The wind brushed my cheek, shifting from left to right and back again. My heartbeat slowed as I locked into the rhythm of the rifle. The world narrowed to the crosshairs, the distance, the math running in my head. This wasn't about revenge, I reminded myself. It was about the truth. I squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked, and the round screamed downrange. "Impact!" someone called. A metallic ring drifted back through the gusts. The first target was down. I didn't allow myself to feel relief. I immediately swung the rifle to the second target at 3,200 meters. The mirage was worse here, distorting the outline of the steel plate. My fingers tightened slightly on the stock as I watched the grass bend mid-range. The wind was faster now, almost erratic. I adjusted again, this time holding just off center, compensating for a gust that threatened to drag the round low. Another breath, another slow trigger press. The shot broke. The metallic clang reached us after a long, agonizing pause. 2 for 2. The crowd stirred now, a ripple of disbelief passing through the bleachers. I felt the weight of my father's gaze on the back of my neck, but I didn't look up. The third target was the one everyone believed I couldn't hit, the full 3,600 meters. My body remained perfectly still as I realigned the scope. The wind was unpredictable, gusting 1 second and dead calm the next. This was where shooters failed. "Last shot," Reeves called out. "Make it count." I inhaled and exhaled, feeling every muscle in my body loosen. My world shrank until all I could hear was the tick of my own breath. Then I took the shot. The rifle's recoil jolted through my shoulder, but I stayed locked behind the scope. The round tore through the air, cutting across gusts that threatened to throw it off course. Time slowed. Every second stretched until I could almost feel the bullet fighting its way forward. Then the distant steel plate rang out, a perfect center hit. The crowd erupted. Gasps turned to shouts, then to cheers that rolled across the range like thunder. Someone actually whistled. A few of the younger shooters slapped each other on the back, their disbelief dissolving into open celebration. I didn't move at first. I stayed prone, breathing steadily, letting the sound wash over me. My hands finally relaxed as I pushed myself up to my knees. Mason was at my side instantly, grinning for the first time in days. "You just shut them all up," he said, voice low. I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my knees, and turned to face the crowd. Reeves's face was pale, his jaw tight as he tried to maintain composure. Donovan muttered something under his breath, but I couldn't hear it over the noise. Then my eyes found my father. He stood apart from the others, hands still shoved in his pockets, his expression unreadable. For a heartbeat, I thought he might look away, but he didn't. He held my gaze, and for the first time in years, there was no contempt in his eyes, no challenge, no dismissal, just silence. I broke eye contact first, refusing to let the moment shatter me. This wasn't about him. The range officer announced the results formally, his voice shaking slightly as he read off the distances and impacts. All 3 targets struck center mass, record validated. Applause broke out again, but I barely heard it. My focus was razor sharp now. Reeves and Donovan were whispering together, clearly rattled. They hadn't expected me to succeed, and now their plan was unraveling in front of their peers. Mason leaned in, his voice barely audible. "We have them on the defensive. Now's the time." I nodded, my hand brushing the pocket that held the hidden drive of footage we had recovered. proof of their conspiracy, proof of my father's silent complicity. But I wasn't ready to detonate it yet. I stepped off the firing line, the cheers fading behind me, and walked straight past Reeves without a word. He turned, his mouth opening as if to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. Instead, I went directly to my father. We stood only a few feet apart now. I expected him to say something, anything, but he didn't. His silence was heavier than any accusation. "I don't need your approval," I said quietly, "but I will have the truth." His jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. I turned and walked back toward Mason and Rodriguez, the weight of the crowd's energy behind me. The truth was close now. I could feel it like the wind at my back. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what was coming. The perfect shot had shattered their doubts. The next one would bring their lies crashing down. The range was still buzzing from the shooting demonstration when I made my move. Mason and Rodriguez flanked me as we crossed the parade grounds, carrying the small encrypted drive like it was a weapon. The briefing room was already filling with officers, senior NCOs, and soldiers who had been at the test. I stepped to the front without waiting to be called, plugged the drive into the central display, and let the footage play. At first, the room was silent as the grainy video filled the screen. Reeves entering the armory after hours, disabling the sensors, followed by General Donovan. Then my father appeared, signing the order that had condemned me 5 years ago. Gasps erupted. The room came alive with whispers and muttered curses. "This is doctored," Reeves snapped from the back. His face was pale, but his voice was sharp, commanding. "You expect us to believe a disgraced ex-soldier over the word of 2 decorated officers?" I turned slowly, meeting his glare. "You can tell them whatever you want, but that's your face on the screen, Reeves. Those are your hands planting evidence. You set me up then, and you tried again now." Donovan stood, his presence alone enough to quiet half the room. "Enough," he barked. "This ends here. We do not drag the reputation of this institution through the mud because of one woman's obsession with vindication." "Reputation?" Mason's voice cut through like a blade. He stepped forward, squaring himself to Donovan. "You call it reputation. I call it lies. We can't call ourselves soldiers if we protect corruption, instead of confronting it." The room split down the middle in an instant. Some nodded in agreement, voices rising. "She deserves justice." Others shook their heads, muttering about protecting the army and not airing dirty laundry. A captain near the back shouted, "You'd rather destroy careers than move on? What good does that do anyone?" My hands curled into fists, but I kept my voice steady. Moving on doesn't erase what happened. It just ensures it happens again, to someone else. You don't have to choose me. You have to choose the truth. The debate escalated into open argument. Some officers shouted for an internal investigation. Others demanded the footage be destroyed. Donovan's face hardened with every passing second. He turned to my father, who stood silently in the corner, and said, Tell them the cost of letting this get out." My father didn't answer. Reeves stepped into the aisle. "This ends now," he snarled. "Hand over that drive or you'll regret it." I held my ground. "No, if you want it, you'll have to take it from me in front of everyone here." The room fell quiet, tension thick as steel wire. Then Mason's voice came again, quieter now, but cutting through the air. "If we let this go, what are we? What's the point of the flag on our shoulder if we can't even tell the difference between loyalty and cowardice?" It was enough to tilt the balance. One by one, soldiers stepped away from Reeves and Donovan, moving closer to my side. Rodriguez joined me at the front, his jaw set. "I saw what they did years ago," he said to the room. "I stayed silent then, not this time. Isla's telling the truth." The crowd shifted decisively. Donovan realized he was losing control. He tried to call the meeting to a close, but a lieutenant colonel from the inspector general's office rose from the back. "This footage will be reviewed at the highest level," she said firmly. "And until then, both General Donovan and Major Reeves are relieved of duty, effective immediately." Reeves exploded in protest, but MPs were already moving in to escort him and Donovan out. As the room cleared, Mason stood next to me, his voice low. "You did it. They can't bury this now." I nodded, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. Because even as the truth spread, I couldn't erase the image of my father signing that paper. I found him waiting outside the barracks later that night, standing alone under a flickering streetlight. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched, his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his jacket. When he saw me, he didn't speak right away. "I wanted to say this before someone else does," he said finally, his voice rough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old pocket watch, the one I had carried for years. He held it out, the metal glinting in the weak light. "I was wrong, Isla. About all of it." I didn't move to take it, not at first. "I thought I was protecting the family's name," he continued. "I thought if I stayed silent, if I signed that paper, we'd keep our dignity. But all I did was betray you. I chose the Army's reputation over my own daughter." His voice cracked, and for a moment he looked like a man stripped of everything he believed himself to be. Slowly, I reached out and accepted the watch, its weight unfamiliar now. "You hurt me," I said quietly, "more than Donovan or Reeves ever could." "I know," he whispered, "and I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to hear me say it. I was wrong, Isla. I should have trusted you." I looked down at the watch, the hands frozen at midnight. It had always been a symbol of his expectations, his belief in limits I could never escape. Now it felt like something else entirely, a reminder of the truth he had ignored. "I'm not interested in revenge," I said finally. "I don't need you to feel what I felt, but we both owe something bigger than pride. We owe the truth." He nodded, swallowing hard. "You're right, and I'll stand beside you when it's time to face the consequences." I stepped back, clutching the watch in my palm. "No," I said, "this is mine to carry. You do what you think is right. But I won't seek vengeance. I'll let the truth speak for itself." He looked like he wanted to say more, but I turned and started walking, my boots crunching softly on the gravel. The wind was cool against my face, carrying the distant sounds of the bass settling into silence. I closed my hand tighter around the watch, its edges digging into my skin. I wasn't finished yet. There would be hearings, investigations, headlines. But for the first time in years, I felt steady. I didn't need to destroy the people who had hurt me. The truth was already doing that. And as for my father, I didn't know if I could ever forgive him. But I knew I wouldn't let anger decide who I became. This time, I would choose justice. The hearings moved faster than anyone expected. Once the footage was verified by independent investigators, Reeves and Donovan had no ground to stand on. Their protests sounded hollow as senior officials read the charges: conspiracy, falsification of evidence, and abuse of authority. By the end of the week, both men were stripped of rank and escorted off base in silence. The same day, the Army officially reopened the mission file that had destroyed my career 5 years earlier. The investigation revealed the truth I had carried alone all this time. I had been scapegoated to protect a chain of command that valued image over lives. The report didn't just clear my name, it detailed the failures that had cost civilians their lives. A staff sergeant I didn't recognize delivered the final decision to me in a small conference room. "You are officially exonerated, Ms. Cameron," he said, sliding a folder across the table. Your record has been cleared, your commendations reinstated, and you are eligible for re-entry into the Special Operations community if you choose to return. I stared at the folder, the weight of it sinking in. My name, my reputation, my honor, all restored with the stroke of a pen. But instead of relief, I felt something quieter, steadier. "Thank you," I said, closing the folder without opening it. "But I won't be coming back." The sergeant looked surprised. "Ma'am, with your skill set, the Valkyrie call sign—" I shook my head. "I'm grateful for the offer, but I don't need a title to know who I am anymore." He nodded once, as if he understood, and left me alone with the folder. I picked it up briefly, then tucked it into my bag. It wasn't the paper that mattered. It was the freedom I'd found in no longer chasing someone else's validation. The nickname Valkyrie had already begun circulating through the ranks, a quiet acknowledgement of my perfect shots on the range. But I didn't need it either. I had what I needed: self-control, clarity, and the knowledge that justice had finally been done. A month later, I walked back onto the range at Fort Whitley, not as a target runner, but as a newly appointed instructor. The familiar smell of dust and gunpowder greeted me like an old friend. Students lined up at the firing line, their rifles gleaming in the morning light. One of the youngest, a nervous-looking private barely old enough to shave, struggled to adjust his stance. I knelt beside him and spoke softly. "Relax your shoulders. You're fighting the rifle. Let it work for you." He exhaled shakily and did as I said. The next round rang true. "Better," I said with a nod. "Remember that feeling." He smiled awkwardly and returned his attention to the target. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold metal of my father's pocket watch. It had been a symbol of limits once, but now it was something else, a reminder that no one could define me but myself. I held it out to the young soldier. "Here," I said, "take this." He blinked at me. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "Don't let anyone put limits on you," I said. "Records can be broken, reputations can be taken, but justice, if you choose it, never disappears. Keep that close, and you'll never lose yourself." He accepted it carefully, the chain glinting in the sunlight. "Thank you," he whispered. I stood and stepped back, watching as he squared his shoulders and took another shot. The round hit closer to center this time. I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not the surge of adrenaline I once sought, but something deeper. Mason appeared beside me, hands in his pockets. "You're settling into this," he said with a small smile. "I am," I admitted. "It feels right." We stood in comfortable silence as the students continued to fire. The air was filled with the sharp crack of rifles and the soft shuffle of boots in the dirt. I let my eyes wander to the horizon, the morning sun painting the hills gold. I felt lighter now, not because the scars had vanished, but because I had learned how to live with them. Before we say goodbye, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story. I turned my attention back to the young private on the line. He steadied his breathing, adjusted his aim, and squeezed the trigger. The round struck true, and I smiled, quietly, content